Hey, this episode is brought to you by the outstanding team at Compass Strategic Advisors, your trusted partner in driving strategic growth. Whether it's expanding into new territories, launching products, rebranding, or hiring key staff and board members, they offer the expert guidance every step of the way. With a versatile approach and a proven track record, Compass is the go-to resource for both startups and established companies looking to scale with confidence. Thanks, and show your support for this podcast by sharing some sponsor appreciation. Check these guys out at www.compass-strategic-advisors.com. Well, this is super exciting for me because I get a lot of active practitioners in the startup game, and sometimes we get somebody here who's seen it all, been there and done that, and is kind of going to keep us ahead of the curve, as it were. Arshavir Blackwell, PhD, long involved in the AI world. Welcome to Liftoff.
Thank you. I'm very, very pleased to be here.
It's a great pleasure to have you. You're down in Los Angeles today, right?
That's right. Where it's
Fantastic.
right now, what, 65 degrees, I think.
And let's make sure our friends on the East Coast of the United States and the world understand it is just humming down in Southern California these days. So many exciting companies and business, and then you've got the great weather. Let's just keep all that fear of earthquakes and fires out of the picture as long as
Yeah,
possible.
exactly.
Well, to dig right into it, you have a new book, The Creative Agency's Guide to AI. And
Yes,
I'm excited to dig in because you've been there and done that for a while. You studied under Jeff Ellman and Liz Bates, right?
that's
UC
right.
San Diego
Exactly. Who were
pioneers. They
two
were
of the
right there at the
really,
beginning, right?
yeah, they were two of the big pioneers. UCSD, UC San Diego, which is where I got my doctorate, was really like the hotbed in the 80s and 90s for a lot of what was called then neural networks and connectionism, and is now what we're calling AI and transformers and LLMs and vision models. And Liz Bates and Jeff Ellman were both, when I go back and read some of their papers now, 30 or 40 years later, I'm really amazed at how much of what's going on now is applicable to what we're doing right now, and how really they just got so much right. And at the time, the problem, of course, was computers were much more underpowered compared to what we've got today. I mean, what we have
Right.
today is amazing. Also, the algorithms and our understanding of how language worked and of how these neural network style algorithms work, that are, they're kind of vaguely based on how the brain works, but not exactly. And so what we're seeing today, 40 years later, is really kind of the fruition of a lot of what their vision. And that vision, it's interesting because at the time, that vision was very much a controversial one, and it was not in the mainstream at all. The sort of mainstream in psychology and psycholinguistics was what Noam Chomsky, who's still with us, really kind of his view of what language was like, which was much more ironically machine-like and computer-like, but not the way we think of AI, but much more symbolic AI. And they really had to fight. And I have to say, I admire them greatly for not backing down and for really pushing their views and saying no. And what I think that was all coming from the fact that they were looking at the actual data. They were looking at how children were learning language. They were looking at how humans use language once they'd fully acquired it. They were looking at how people who are multilingual and how people who had brain damage were using language or were not using language. And they stayed close enough to the data that I think it really helped to produce a lot of what we're seeing today, which is very, very close to what they amazingly came up with, way back in the day.
Yeah, a lot of conversation around the thinking machine and how far we are going to take that, right?
Yeah.
The idea of AI starting to interpret, now starting to think on its own. Where do you chart that when you look at these trends?
Well, it's funny because I've just been working on a paper about, is AI, how conscious is AI? And I'm very much in the middle on the hype doom spectrum. So I don't think that a lot of the doom is warranted, but I do think that we're seeing significant economic disruption because of AI, and I think we're going to see a lot more of it. But I mean, I would say, keep in mind that every really amazing technological innovation from the printing press to the telegraph to the train to, television and radio and then the computer and then the internet, all of those have produced really great progress, but also really great upheavals in society.
Right.
And I think that if we take all of those past historical events as a guide, what you're going to find is that we did adapt to those, and there was some pain. I'm not going to, deny that because there definitely was some pain. Um, but I think there was a lot of concern. For instance, you had all these people in back offices in the 40s and 50s. You had these huge rooms full of people at those old style,
Yeah.
calculators.
Yeah.
And the concern was, oh, all those people are going to be out of work. What are they going to do when we get these computers in that take the role of everybody in this room, basically? But somehow there was an adaptation, and there are still plenty of jobs out there that humans can only do that AI can't do. And I think it's going to be a long time before we see uh, a problem where there's just like nothing left for human beings to do. I mean, that may eventually happen like in some Star Trek future universe, but
Well,
no,
there
I
is
don't think that's anytime soon.
there is a big delta now between those who believe we're seeing significant productivity gains today
Yeah.
and those who don't see it as well. And we're seeing reports supporting those points. And then we are also seeing the future cast of what jobs to get eliminated. Where do you want to go run to
Yeah.
maintain your, economic independence, your work satisfaction index, and all of those elements. So how are you starting to track all of this?
Well, so the first thing is I think that we are seeing some impacts of it. We're not necessarily seeing them, in sort of the leading economic indicators yet, but I would point out, look, it's really early. I mean, ChatGPT and those kinds of systems have only been out for what, like about 3 years in sort of their current incarnation. And I remember seeing the first web page, probably that was what, 1993, and that was an academic web page. I mean, that wasn't even like, Banana Republic or something. And 3 years later, the internet was still very much in its infancy. And yet it was pretty clear, I think, even then, that it was going to be a huge phenomenon, that websites were eventually going to take over a lot of e-commerce, and that people were going to be using the internet for so many things that they had previously been, running to the store to do or calling up someone on the phone to do or something like that. So I don't think that we've really had enough time to see the full impact of what's going on with these systems. And when I use them, all the time, every day. And when I see how incredibly sophisticated their quote unquote thinking is, and I say quote unquote because on the other hand, I'm not a member of that sort of hype group that says they're conscious and they can think and that, they're going to take over the world or something like that. They have some very, very amazingly sophisticated behaviors, and they can say things which sound as though they're introspecting on their own lives. Well, I made this decision because I did, I had this thought and so on and so forth. But whether or not um, that means that they're actually conscious and aware, I think, is a relatively open question. But I think at this point, the answer is pretty much no, but not completely rule outable as they become more and more sophisticated,
Right.
you know. And there are a lot of reasons, technically and otherwise, to doubt that what you're seeing right now is genuine conscious behavior. I mean, an analogy I think of is here in LA now, we have a lot of those self-driving Waymos. And they've only been active here, I think, for a little less than actually ChatGPT's been around. So like,
Yeah.
maybe a year or two, and longer in San Francisco. I remember seeing them up there a couple of years ago. And right now, you're seeing a lot of them on the road, relatively speaking, but it's not like every car is a self-driving car.
No, although it seems
And
like it sometimes.
yeah, no, it does seem like it sometimes. And so I think that in the same way, it's just very early. I think someone's saying, oh gosh, there's not enough self-driving cars on the road, and so it's just never really going to take off. And
Let
I
me
think
let
it's
me
the
take a
same kind of thing.
let me take a turn on that though, if I may.
Yeah.
If you're advising business today, and I won't be more specific intentionally, just
Okay.
how much do you would advise them that they should be building agents for almost every key function and have it set up so that agents can communicate with agents, and then that productivity that gets assigned to them also has a metric associated with that productivity.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what should be getting done. Now, what I'd point out is that an analysis of exactly what goes wrong when some companies put AI into practice. One of the biggest problems that they found is that the implementation doesn't integrate into the existing workflow and the existing dynamics of the company. So they'll sort of basically they'll bolt on some AI component in some way or another that's over here, and then they have their workflow over here, and they really haven't made it easy. So there's a lot of copying and pasting, or there's a lot of, you know, I have to reformat this information in a way for the AI to accept it. And so people just don't find that to be a particularly useful utility for them. And so I think that's not the fault of the AI itself. That's the fault of the way it's been integrated in. And I think that as we get more savvy about uh, how to integrate these things in and how to use these as part of our workflow, that problem's going to become less and less prevalent. And that's when you're going to begin to see some real gains, in my view.
It's interesting. You mentioned the early days of computers and networking, and
Yeah,
remember all those challenges we had with token ring and netware and interoperability, and that brought in the rise of consultants and then global integrators.
right.
And you had all these people that were essentially a channel of distribution, became a channel of services that had
Yeah.
to make sure everything worked. And then they became sort of the top of the pyramid in terms of who was going to get it done and who was going to realize the productivity gains, who were the best at performing those services.
Right. I remember when I was at Ask Jeeves many, many, many years
Yeah,
ago.
thanks for mentioning
A,
that
a,
poll.
a
That
na-
was a great one.
yeah, a name that, is probably not going to be familiar to everybody, but hopefully some people remember it.
How about the
Uh,
logo with the butler?
yeah,
Huh?
the Butler logo. I remember that. I missed that.
I do
They now
too.
it's just like ask.com or something generic. But
Right.
I remember, that we were talking about how as soon as we got major funding, like one of the first things was just to write a huge check to Oracle to design the database. And that was kind of the default behavior at the time for any kind of startup. And of course, now you could just use a cloud database that, say Google provides, or I mean, a lot of those back end infrastructure problems have essentially not gone away, but have become much less costly for startups to deal with. And I suspect you'll probably see that kind of trend continuing with AI as well. Because there's just such a huge amount of activity going on in that space, and it's got such an amazing potential. And even just if you see what it's doing now, um, not just potential, but
Yeah.
what's going on.
So when you look at this scenario, where do you see the big opportunity? I know this is part of your book, but just in general, where are you getting excited when you see the next 24 months evolve?
Well, there are a lot of really cool opportunities. I mean, Anthropic is doing some very good work. They do Claude, and Anthropic, for instance, has just released what they call Claude Cowork, and this actually can access the files on your hard drive, and it can also sort of prod you to continue to work on whatever project. So it's not so much a passive recipient of what human beings are typing into it. It's much more of a really a coworker. And I think that that's the way, as you know, in the next 24 months, what we're going to see is not someone dumping something into AI and then getting a response and posting it. We're going to see that the real value of AI is a cooperative system, a collaborator will work hand in glove. So I'll write up something and the AI will give notes and some feedback on how well it thinks it's going to hit. And then I'll respond to that. And it'll be sort of a virtuous cycle of each system. So the AI eventually, I think what will happen is it will be able to learn your particular pattern of work behavior. So right now, frontier models, they're kind of siloed. So when you use it, there is a little bit of carryover, but basically each conversation is essentially a new conversation with the AI. And I think what you're going to see is first of all, hand in glove sort of cooperation, B, some learning and carryover. And I think the other thing that isn't really so much on people's radar now, but that I think you're going to see is really most people, when they think of AI right now, they think of the frontier models, the Chat GPTs, the Google Geminis, the, Claudes. But there's an enormous amount of potential in using local large language models that are just resident on your own machine and that don't necessarily have to connect to the internet in order to do what they do. And these are smaller models, but I've worked with them, and it's amazing how they're remarkably powerful for their size. And of course, all of these models, the local ones and the frontier ones, are all just going to get better and better and better. So I think you're going to begin to see people recognizing that local language models, local large language models, have a lot of advantages because, first of all, a lot of the use cases that businesses have require confidentiality. So with medical, with digital agencies, which is what I talk about in my book, that digital agencies, their concern is, we don't want our intellectual property to end up as training data for ChatGPT and then end up in somebody else's deck. You have the same thing with, medical information, obviously, and with legal information. And so you can run a complete large language model locally without it ever being connected to the internet and still get some very useful, powerful results from that.
Save a lot of
Um,
money too.
what's that?
You
And
save a lot
yes,
of
and
money.
you would absolutely, you would save a lot of money because the thing is that the frontier models are very powerful, but how much of that power do you necessarily need for your particular use case?
Yeah, I think you're
So if
making the
you're
case you don't
looking
need it. Yeah.
Exactly. If you're looking for some kind of general Swiss Army knife supercomputer style model, then something like ChatGPT or Claude is going to be the thing you're going to choose. But if you're looking for very, very specific kinds of use cases and they're very narrow, so you're talking about a digital agency that wants to get ideas and information and, work content for a new toothpaste or something like that,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um, then you really don't need all of the power of those large frontier models.
You're bringing up this interesting point, which I haven't dwelled on much, the localization of LLMs.
Yes.
I've heard we talking a lot today about the verticalization of
Yeah.
LLM, where a lot of the apps are more horizontal in nature,
Yeah.
and those are becoming very popular. But there's also a lot of push now towards medical AI,
Exactly.
and what's next? Plumbing AI or golf AI or real
Why
estate
not,
AI?
right? I
Yeah, is
mean,
that
why
what?
not tune it? And that's the other thing that you have with large language models that are local
Hmm.
is you can tune them on your own material and still keep them offline. so that they are tuned. Now, the problem, one of the things I talk about in my book is that the problem a lot of people have with using AI for creative work is everything kind of comes out sounding the same. And you want to preserve the voice of your agency, the voice of your product when you're doing any kind of, advertising outreach, whether it's a Facebook post or, a
Right.
print ad or what have you. And what you can do with large language models that are local is you can actually give it snippets of your previous work product. You can give it, old ad campaigns and so forth, and have it learn to use that voice in anything that you create afterwards. So you train it on, hey, this is like our past year's work of work, and we're a very hip Gen Z agency, and this is the kind of hip stuff that we provide.
Right.
And then you say, okay, now I want to sell this new coffee house. And it writes it not in sort of generic AI form, but in something that's very specific to the voice that you've already established. And it works really well. It's really quite amazing that these relatively small models can be tuned so well. And the thing is, you can't do that with frontier models. You can't tune them. What you do is, you send it off to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, and you get a response.
Yeah.
You can do a little bit of tuning by playing with the prompt, of course, but it's not, generally speaking, going to be as powerful. And again, you're going to have the privacy concerns. So
Yeah.
I think I think that's one of the things that you're going to see in the next 24 months becoming more prominent. And cost is a big factor too, as you point out.
I also think it's kind of funny, as you point out, in your book's The Creative Agency Guide to AI, and most of the shots AI takes is it doesn't work for creative, right? It's
Right.
sort of not the thinking, dialect you're looking for.
That is true, and that's one thing that I address is because a lot of AI does come out with this very generic sort of homogenous voice in so much of the creative work it provides. And my thesis is not that you give the AI something and it does it and it's gone. My thesis is that you can use it to generate ideas for you that you can then, filter through and select, to give you feedback and targeting. One thing that I've had a lot of experience with is Facebook targeting.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting to me is that previously with targeting, you had to basically just let the ad go out there on Facebook and see how people reacted, and that there was a turnaround time to that. And if you weren't getting traction with it, then you'd have to tweak it and try to get something else. What AI allows you to do, most people think of AI as creating content, but AI can also give you some judgment on content. And so what you can have it do is say, hey, for this particular kind of content, this is who I think you're most likely to be successful targeting. And of these 10 targets, this is how I would phrase what you're trying to say in this document, to best reach your target on Facebook or whatever your target is.
That's really a good point, and I'm glad you brought that up. It's
Yeah,
something I've sort of teased myself with experimenting in such ways, but
yeah.
really nail it. Where do you stand on the development of AGI and the whole next quantum leap in technology?
I think that I'm pretty agnostic about that. I'm not a big fan of making predictions because usually they're wrong. I think that what's going to happen is that these systems will become more and more sophisticated.
Yes.
Um, and some people might interpret that as being, AGI, and some people will say it's consciousness. The problem is that we don't really have a good understanding of what consciousness is in human beings.
Mm.
So, we have a lot of theories, but as far as what's going on, is it because we have carbon and neural tissue and these things are silicon, which is a different substrate? We really don't know. So, I mean, if we're talking about AGI, the sort of limit of it is this notion that it's actually going to become aware and alive and conscious and like maybe, start killing people like Hal in 2001. And I don't really think that that's what we're going to see happening. I think we're going to see amazing sophistication, but they're also going to continue to be somewhat passive. I mean, I think my view is probably the best example of what they're going to be like is the computers on Star Trek. So
Mm.
on Star Trek, they're incredibly sophisticated, but they're also essentially passive tools to be used by, whoever, the people, Captain Kirk and Picard and all those people. So
Yeah.
the computers never kind of take over and they're not ever like characters in the story or anything like except for Data, I guess. And so I think it's going to be, you'll see incredible sophistication, but they'll still essentially be tools waiting for us to interact with them. They're not going to be like, hey, I'm here. I want to do this. I want to do that. I have agency. Um, until maybe, I don't know what, there's a lot of theory around the notion of these models will really take off when they're embodied in some kind of a humanoid, robotic, or not even humanoid, but some kind of robotic structure. The reason being, they'll be able to learn continuously by interacting with the environment. And that will give them actual agency. And that's a very interesting idea. I mean, we already have humanoid robots kind of as
Right.
prototypes. So I'm open to those, becoming extremely sophisticated. And I always said I never studied because people were like, well, you're so interested in computers. Why didn't you ever study robots? And I always say, I don't want to study something that could come after me. And, that's the thing is that
Yeah.
they could like potentially, they usually when you see them, they're kind of in these pens.
Oh yeah.
They don't go crazy and within research environments, so they don't go crazy and start killing people. And whether that's killing people out of malice or just a malfunction doesn't kind of matter if you're the dead guy, right? So,
I've seen
um,
those movies too.
yeah,
Hey,
exactly.
Arshvir,
We've all
I
seen
want
those
to
movies.
steer this conversation coming around the bend here. Again, appreciate your time and wisdom. The idea that I reach a lot of early stage companies that are building
Mhm.
AI tools, technologies, software applications, programs, platforms, etc. And I know you do as well. You come from an academic orientation, and
Yeah.
how do you coach in an environment like the one we're in today that changes so rapidly? So we've got the playbook from the computer era. We sped forth. Now we have the playbook from the SaaS era. There's a whole bunch of other, industry segments, of course, that have their own playbooks. But now we're in AI. Do we throw all that away and start anew? Or how do I go about building a company in this for this era, for this day and age, really?
That's a great question. I think that in terms of coaching new talent for
Mm,
those kinds of, challenges, I think people are going to have to take much more responsibility for their own education and actually go be much more proactive about going out there. So, this notion that you go to your local college or extension and you take a course or something like that, I think that's probably not going to be as feasible for
mm,
people in the future because, first of all, things are changing so fast that every year the course is going to have to change.
yeah.
And I think that what you see now is people are doing much more of this coding through AI. And because of that, that's really kind of the skill they have to learn, which is not the coding per se so much, although you still should understand how code works, but rather the ways that you in how to optimally interact with AI so that it provides you with um, the output and the result, the work product that you're trying to get. And so I think that for myself, I've seen it's much more of a sort of personal, you have to really be super motivated and be a self-starter, I think.
Yeah.
And you
That's
have
a
to
great
just
point. Yeah.
what's that? Yeah, you have to
That's a
just say,
great point.
I'm gonna go in there, I'm gonna interact with these systems on a regular basis. I'm gonna do, I do things like I'll create a collab project, which is a Google, basically a sort of a little research tool that Google provides people for free. And so anyone can create Google Colab projects and use them to step through code and to look at what these systems are doing. And I think that understanding those aspects of AI is probably going to be much more important than understanding how to code a line of Python, although that's, still going to be important. But we are seeing tremendous upheaval in, the kinds of things that companies are looking for. And a lot of them, I think, just aren't all, unfortunately, a lot of them just know there's this thing called AI and they need to know about it, but they don't have really much of an understanding of it.
Yeah,
And I think the only thing that's going to solve that problem is time.
it's going to take a lot of work.
It's going to take time and a lot of work. And these things always, if you look back to the internet, I mean, it was really many, many years from the beginning of the first web browser and the first website to when it just became part of the economic life
Right.
of, the world, basically.
So given your study and your focus, the new book on the creative agency, are you looking at a new business yourself? Do you have a new idea? What do you do with those great ideas?
Yeah, I'm actually working on a couple things. One of them is basically is a local LLM for creative agencies and potentially for other kinds
Oh, please keep us
of
informed on that. Please.
yeah, you can actually get a little more information about it at well, there's my newsletter first, which is insidetheblackbox.ai.
Great.
And then there's also yourvoicecraft.ai, which is a link to the book, but also talks a little bit more about the application itself. And basically, the application, you can think of it as like ChatGPT for private local use. And so what happens is we give the client a local system that they can run if they wish to, completely air-gapped, not connected to the internet in any way. And we get from them, as I was talking about before, we get from them basically snippets, kind of like, what a bloodhound would get to kind of learn what it is you're looking for. The system gets trained on those, which doesn't take very long. And then they have a completely closed system that they can use in order to do, in this first case, digital agency work. And I've done a little of this, testing it and so forth, done a lot of it actually. And it works very well. And eventually, I'd like to see it sort of scaled to other domains where privacy and security are concerned. So I actually worked at a company that did legal document analysis using computers and linguists sort of combined. And again, it was this sort of human and computer together model. And the security requirements there were enormous. I mean, we had to actually black out windows where the
Oh,
legal
wow.
material, yeah, it was kind of crazy where the legal material was stored because they were afraid, someone would try to peer in with a telescope. I don't know what they were afraid of, but so that's one of the basically the major thing I'm working on right now. A couple other little projects, but I won't get into that. But I think that the local language model is going to be for a lot of people where their buy-in to AI starts with, or at least is an important component of.
You're fantastic. I'm really intrigued. I want to continue to follow up. The book is The Creative Agency Guide to AI.
Yes.
Arshavir, thanks for sharing some time. Do you have any last parting thoughts that you want to share?
No, I've loved this. This is great. This is I love the talking about this. This is a topic love to talk about.
Well,
And
I'll make sure in our show notes we'll copy both the podcast, the blog, and
yeah,
several other things. Because again, this is a story that just continues to unfold at a very fast pace, and
yes.
it's good to check in. So let's
It's
make sure we
very
check in
amazing what's
again.
going on. Yes. Great. Thanks, Bob. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.